Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Micah Danner, and for 6 years I lived like a ghost in my own family, present at birthdays, polite at holidays, and invisible the rest of the time. I wasn't a black sheep exactly, more like a non-factor, the kind of person relatives tilt their heads at and say, "So what do you do again?" even though you've explained it 10 times. To them I was the crypto guy, the one who never got a real job. It all came to a head at last year's 4th of July cookout. My dad, beer in hand and ego on full blast, clinked bottles with my uncle and loudly proclaimed, "That internet money of Micah's? It'll never pay the mortgage." The table burst into laughter. Even my sister, Rachel, smirked. I stood there, ribs on my plate going cold, pretending I hadn't heard it. But I had. Every word. What they didn't know was that just the day before, I'd received an acquisition offer from a European tech firm. $27.5 million. That's not a typo. $27.5 million. I'd spent half a decade building a blockchain protocol that reduced transaction latency by over 60%. For most people at that barbecue, that sentence meant nothing. But for investors, it meant everything. They couldn't see it, of course. To them, success looked like my sister's husband Brandon, a regional manager at some car dealership chain. He wore a gold watch and called himself a people person. My dad adored him. At every family gathering he found a way to compare us. "You know, Brandon's got a knack for business. That's something you can't teach." What he meant was, "That's something you'll never have, Micah." I stayed quiet. I always did. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence is underestimated. Silence remembers. Later that night, driving back to my small apartment, I stared at the offer again. The wire transfer was pending. By Monday morning, I'd be wealthier than everyone in my bloodline combined. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. 6 years of sleepless nights, coding through holidays, skipping meals, watching friends get married and buy homes while I bet it all on lines of code, just to be treated like an overgrown teenager with a hobby. And here's the worst part. I had no one to share the win with. Because the people I loved most didn't believe in me. Not even a little. I was 14 when I first taught myself to code, using a busted laptop my mom found at a garage sale. I'd stay up until 3 a.m. building programs, mining through online forums, addicted to learning. They called it a phase. Like that astronomy thing, my dad said dismissively. "He'll grow out of it." I didn't. Graduated high school, got a scholarship to Tulsa State, majored in computer science. Dropped out my junior year to work on what would become HyperNet, the optimization protocol that eventually changed my life. Dad didn't speak to me for 3 months after that. Rachel stopped inviting me to things. Even Mom cried and said, "You're throwing it all away." So I did the only thing I could do. I buried myself in the work. I lived in a 1-bedroom shoebox above a nail salon. Survived on ramen, off-brand coffee, and hope. While they took vacations, I debugged code. While they posted Instagram pictures from Disneyland, I crashed from energy drinks and anxiety. And I kept going. Even when the loneliness set in. Even when the doubts whispered, "What if they're right?" I never stopped. 8 months ago, I published a white paper on my protocol. 3 days later, my inbox exploded. Venture capital firms. Private equity guys. A woman named Allison from Vertex Capital who said, "Micah, do you know what you've built?" I didn't. I was just solving a problem that wouldn't let me sleep. That week I got my first offer. $3 million. I turned it down. 6 weeks later, $8 million. No. Then came the $27.5 million bid, with a 2-year consulting deal on top. I signed it on a Tuesday. Then I cried. Not because I was rich. Because no one in my family would care. The next Sunday was our family barbecue, the same one where they made jokes about my internet money. My dad, in his usual lawn chair, said, "Brandon's dealership is hiring. Good benefits." I smiled, nodded. "Thanks, I'll think about it." The check had already cleared. I wanted to tell them. Wanted to stand up, show them the wire transfer, the contract, the bank balance. I wanted to scream, "I did it. I freaking did it." But I didn't. Instead, I made a decision. Not just about the money. About them. I wasn't going to prove them wrong. I was going to let them prove themselves. That night, I sat by my apartment window with a notebook and pen. I made a list. Not of enemies. Of needs. Dad's overdue knee surgery. Rachel's daughter's tuition. Mom's mortgage balance. Brandon's job insecurity. Uncle John's back taxes on the family farm. One by one I listed their struggles. And then I made a plan. Not to buy their love, but to change the power dynamic forever, without ever saying a word. The Monday after the barbecue, while my dad probably returned to his sales job and my mom watered the dying roses in front of their outdated porch, I walked into a wealth management firm in downtown Oklahoma City dressed in a $35 Target button-up. No one looked twice at me, which was exactly what I wanted. My advisor's name was Olivia Kane, mid-40s, no-nonsense, discreet. She looked at my bank statement, then at me and said, "Most people in your position want a mansion or at least a Ferrari." "That's not me," I told her. Her eyebrow lifted, curious. "Then what do you want?" I paused. "I want control. Not power. Not attention. Just the quiet knowledge that they'll never dismiss me again. Even if they never know why." She leaned back and nodded. "I think I can help with that." Over the next month, Olivia helped me set up anonymous charitable trusts, offshore accounts, and tax-sheltered family assistance funds. Every dime was documented, every payment untraceable to me. The plan wasn't just to help. They could never suspect the help came from me. The first to benefit was Rachel's daughter, Zoe. Private middle school tuition, paid in full. Labeled as a grant through a newly created foundation for young women in tech, complete with a fake advisory board and a website I coded myself. Rachel called 2 days later, sobbing. "I don't know who applied on our behalf, but this grant is covering everything. Zoe's whole year. Even a laptop." I smiled through the phone. "Wow, that's amazing. Maybe your luck is turning." She sniffled. "I think it is." The second gift went to my dad. His knee had been bad for years, bone on bone, painkillers and tough guy bravado. He kept saying he didn't want the surgery because doctors just want your money. The truth was he didn't have the money, and he was too proud to ask. So I arranged for a fictitious Veterans Medical Relief Program to sponsor his operation. He'd been in the National Guard years ago, barely long enough to qualify for benefits but just enough to be believable. The foundation even sent a handwritten note signed by a Colonel Whitaker. The following week, Rachel called again. "Micah, you're not gonna believe this. Dad got a call, some military funds covering his surgery. Full cost. Hospital, recovery, the works." He cried. I've never seen him cry like that. "Good for him," I said, heart racing. "Yeah, he's still stubborn though. Said he'd rather it came from family than strangers." Of course he did. In silence I kept helping them. Brandon got offered a job at a new dealership across town, better commission, company car, and a boss who liked his leadership style. That boss? A former client of Olivia's who owed her a favor. The job wasn't fake, but it was nudged into his path by a phone call I never made in my name. A month later, I heard through Rachel that Brandon had accepted. He said he was just lucky to be in the right place at the right time. I almost laughed. Right place at the right time? No, Brandon. You were exactly where I put you. But here's where things started to shift. The more I gave, the more they noticed the patterns. Zoe's school. Dad's surgery. The job. The timing. The random help that always came at just the right moment. It was too neat. Too convenient. Brandon, of all people, was the first to suspect. Rachel called me one evening. "He thinks someone in the family is secretly helping us." "Oh." He said he thinks it might be you." My stomach twisted. "What? Why?" "He says you've been calm lately. Not tense or frustrated. Like someone who doesn't have to worry anymore. Like someone who knows something." I tried to laugh. "Rachel, I live in a one-bedroom over a nail salon. I drive a Honda Civic. If I had that kind of money, don't you think you'd know?" She paused. "That's just it." Brandon said maybe you don't want us to know. I didn't have an answer for that. 3 months into my silent campaign, Uncle John's farm, our grandfather's old land, was saved. It had been close to foreclosure for years. Tax debt, equipment loans, legal disputes with the county. I paid every cent quietly. Through an anonymous real estate trust registered in Delaware. The county clerk called him personally to inform him, "Someone's paid your liens. Entire balance. You're clear." At the next Sunday dinner, they toasted to God's mysterious ways. My mom clasped her hands teary-eyed. Maybe it's a sign. Maybe someone out there is looking out for us. I bit my tongue so hard it bled. They were looking at the sky for answers, never the sun sitting in their kitchen. And then came the shift. My dad. The man who once mocked my every choice. He started changing. He read an article about blockchain and printed it out. He asked questions at dinner, actual questions. "So Micah, what's the difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin?" It wasn't sarcasm. It wasn't a trap. It was curiosity. Then one night he said something I'll never forget. I still don't get all of it, but I've been thinking maybe you were right to stick with your project. It takes guts to go your own way. I froze. Because it was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and replayed his words. I wanted to tell him everything. Wanted to say, I did this. I saved the farm. I got you that surgery. I'm not a failure. I'm the one who saved you and you didn't even know. But I didn't. Because the truth is, I wasn't ready to give up the power that silence had given me. There's something addictive about being the secret hand guiding everything, like being God in your own family drama. But there was one person I could trust. Rachel. She was the only one who ever tried to understand me. If anyone could help me reveal the truth the right way, it was her. I invited Rachel to meet me at a quiet cafe near Riverside Park. One of those mom-and-pop places that serves coffee in chipped mugs and has more ceiling fans than customers. It was intentional. I didn't want any distractions. When she walked in, she already looked wary. You're not dying, are you? She asked, slipping into the seat across from me. Depends how dramatic you want this to be. She smirked. Micah, you never call people for coffee. I slid a manila folder across the table. What's this? Open it. Inside were trust documents, legal statements, tax forms, and a single-page summary titled, The Danner Family Fund. Rachel's eyes flicked across the pages, her brow furrowing, her fingers trembling slightly. This says it's worth 7 figures? Almost 8 actually, I said quietly. Her voice dropped. Micah, what the hell is this? It's real. It's mine. It's yours. It's everyone's. I sold the company, my blockchain protocol. 5 months ago. She stared at me like I'd grown horns. You sold your, wait for how much? $27.5 million. Plus bonuses. So, closer to $42 now. Her mouth opened. Closed. Then opened again. I knew it, she whispered. Brandon knew it. You've been behind everything, haven't you? Zoe's tuition, Dad's surgery, Uncle John's farm. I nodded. And no one knows. Not even Mom. Not Dad. She pressed her hand to her chest and exhaled hard. Jesus, Micah. That's insane. Why didn't you tell us? I looked out the window trying to find the words. Because I didn't want it to be about the money. I wanted to be seen before I was rich. But they couldn't do it. Not until the miracles started happening. Rachel was silent for a long time. Then she reached out and grabbed my hand. You should have told me. You're the only one I can tell, I said. I need your help. Over the next few weeks, Rachel became my silent co-conspirator. At dinners, she'd drop articles about blockchain success stories into casual conversation. When our parents asked how she was doing, she'd reply, better, thanks to smart investing. Micah gave me some great tips. She was planting seeds, changing the narrative slowly. She even convinced Brandon to ask me over one night to teach him how crypto works. I walked him through the basics like he was any other curious stranger. It wasn't about impressing him. It was about conditioning them to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the family disappointment they'd always assumed. Then came the next phase. Rachel and I scheduled a family financial planning session, under the pretense of securing the farm's long-term future. We brought in a financial planner, not Olivia, someone else, someone neutral, who introduced the concept of family trusts and legacy funds. Mom looked confused. Dad looked skeptical. Brandon looked bored. But then the planner pulled out a printed spreadsheet of potential anonymous contributions already allocated. That woke them up. What's this? Dad asked, squinting at the numbers. Rachel chimed in. There's a trust. Someone's been funding it quietly. We don't know who. But why? Mom asked. The planner smiled. Maybe because they care about your future more than you think. No one spoke. I stayed quiet, my hands folded. Brandon side-eyed me. Rachel looked down to hide her smile. They were catching on. And I was okay with that. Because the real twist was coming. A week later, Rachel called. Zoe's school is hosting a career day. They want tech professionals. I told them you'd do it. I don't talk in public, I said. You don't usually. But this time you will. I hesitated. Is Mom going? Yes. And Dad. And Brandon. And Zoe really wants you there. I exhaled. Slowly. Fine. What I didn't tell her was that I had plans for that stage. Career day. I hadn't stood in front of a crowd since college, and even then, I wasn't exactly known for public speaking. But this wasn't just about Zoe. This was about every single person who ever doubted me, sitting in that audience waiting for me to speak. When I walked into Tulsa West Middle School, the hall was already half full. Rows of folding chairs. Teachers corralling kids with clipboards. Posters of astronauts and firefighters and real estate agents lined the walls. Rachel greeted me with a reassuring squeeze of the arm. "They're all here," she whispered. "Mom, Dad, Brandon, even Uncle John. And Zoe's been bragging to everyone that her uncle builds the internet." I chuckled. Close enough. When they called my name, Micah Danner, software developer and tech entrepreneur, the kids barely looked up. But I noticed my dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, ready for whatever rambling nonsense he expected me to say. It let him brace for disappointment. I stepped up to the mic. I'm Micah," I began, voice calm but deliberate. "6 years ago, I dropped out of college because I believed in something no one else understood. Blockchain." A few kids perked up. A few adults glanced at each other, unsure. Back then, my family thought I was throwing my life away. They thought success meant selling cars, wearing nice watches, or getting promoted at a real job. I paused, scanning the faces. My mom was frowning. My dad shifted uncomfortably. Brandon stared at his shoes. "I spent years building a technology that reduced crypto transaction speeds by 60%. I lived in a one-bedroom above a nail salon. I ate ramen 6 days a week. I missed birthdays and holidays because I was too busy writing code no one cared about." A few students laughed nervously. The adults weren't laughing at all now. And then one day I got an email. A company offered to buy my software for $27.5 million. The room went dead silent. My dad's eyes shot open. My mom gasped audibly. Brandon's mouth actually fell open. "But that's not the important part," I continued. "The money didn't make me successful. Sticking to what I believed in did." I let that hang in the air. "And because I believe in making sure the next generation doesn't have to wait until they're 27 to be taken seriously, I'm donating a technology grant to this school. Every student will have access to their own laptop, and coding classes will be available starting this fall." Gasp. Murmurs. The principal actually stood and clapped. Then everyone else followed. But I didn't look at them. I looked at my dad, who was sitting there slack-jawed, stunned. For the first time in my life, I watched as something shifted behind his eyes. Not judgment, not pride exactly, but understanding. I stepped off the stage. Zoe ran up and hugged me so hard I nearly dropped my folder. "You're famous now, Uncle Micah," she squealed. I smiled. "Let's not tell anyone just yet, okay?" Behind her, my dad approached like he was walking on eggshells. "Micah," he began, voice low. "Was that true? About the money?" "Actually," I said, "with bonuses, it's closer to $42 million. He blinked hard. My God. Then came the real question. The farm. The surgery. The scholarships. "Was that you?" I met his eyes. All I ever wanted was to help. Not to prove anything. Just to be part of the family, even if I didn't fit your idea of success. He didn't say anything right away. But he reached out slowly and shook my hand. "My son did all that?" he said softly. "Micah. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to," I said. "Not anymore." He nodded. "I'm proud of you, son. Not just because of the money. Because you never gave up. That takes more guts than I had." That night, I drove home in my beat-up Honda. Same apartment. Same street. Same city. But everything had changed. The man who once mocked me, now respected me. The brother-in-law who offered me dealership jobs, now asked for crypto advice. And Rachel, the only one who never gave up on me, was by my side every step of the way. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. 2 weeks after career day, I stood in the middle of a modest 2-story brick house just 10 minutes from Rachel's place. Wooden floors, wide hallways, and most importantly, no stairs. My dad's new knees weren't ready for another flight of them. "This place yours?" he asked, walking in behind me, voice full of suspicion and awe. "No," I said. "It's yours." He blinked. "Come again?" I handed him the keys along with the deed. Paid in full. Through the Danner Family Trust. "You can thank the anonymous donor if you want." He gave me a long look. "So we're still playing that game, huh?" "Maybe," I said with a smile. "Depends if it's working." He didn't answer. He just looked around the space, at the handrails installed in the hallway, the custom-built kitchen Mom had once pointed out in a magazine, the garage large enough for both their cars. Then he said something I never expected. "I don't understand everything you built, Micah. But I'm starting to understand you." That meant more than any apology. We spent the weekend moving them in. Rachel came with Zoe. Brandon brought a rental truck. Even Uncle John drove out with extra tools and too much advice. Felt real. Like we weren't just related anymore, we were finally functioning as a family. Mom kept tearing up over the pantry shelves. Dad grumbled about how the new water heater was too quiet. And I mostly stayed in the background, watching, until Brandon cornered me near the driveway. "So," he said, hands in his pockets, "42 million, huh? Something like that. And you let me offer you dealership jobs?" "I let a lot of things happen," I said. "Because sometimes, letting people underestimate you is the best weapon you'll ever have." He laughed. "Okay, that's terrifying. And kinda brilliant." He extended his hand. "No hard feelings?" "None," I said, shaking it. "Actually, I was thinking of helping you launch a crypto leasing platform for used cars." His eyes lit up. "Seriously?" "Seriously. But you'd have to learn blockchain first." "I'm in," he said instantly. Never too late to be the student. Rachel, meanwhile, had quit her draining accounting job. I'd helped her set up her own financial consultancy, one focused on helping families with trust funds, investments, and navigating sudden wealth. Her first clients? Some very surprised Danners. Zoe, for her part, was now the unofficial crypto princess of her school. Her teachers said she was already coding basic smart contracts on her tablet. She told everyone her uncle built the internet. I didn't correct her. But not everything was sunshine and passive income. About 5 months after the acquisition, I sat down with Olivia Kane again. We were going over distribution models when she leaned forward with that thoughtful look of hers. "You've handled this better than most," she said. "But we need to talk about sustainability." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the money?" "No. The identity. You've spent half a year being anonymous, then revealing it piece by piece. But your family's starting to adjust to the money more than the man behind it." I thought that was the goal. It was. But at some point you'll need to ask, who are you if you're no longer a secret? That hit harder than I expected. Because the truth was, I had wrapped my entire sense of self in being unseen, underestimated, mocked, and then proving them wrong in silence. Now they saw me. Now they respected me. So who was I, now? The answer came from the unlikeliest place, my mom. One quiet night she knocked on my apartment door. She hadn't been there in years. She walked in, looked around at the cramped kitchen, the fading carpet, the worn couch. "You've still got the same old place," she said gently. "Never really needed more." She sat down. "We didn't treat you well." I froze. "I don't mean just the jokes," she said. "I mean how we looked at you. How we measured your worth." "It's okay, Mom?" "No. It wasn't." Her voice cracked. "You were always building something. And we didn't see it. We only saw what you weren't. A lawyer, a doctor, a teacher. We didn't see what you were." I sat down across from her. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. "I'm proud of you, Micah," she whispered. "Not because you're rich. Because you stuck it out. And now, I'm just trying to catch up." I reached for her hand. "You don't have to catch up," I said. "You just have to stay." Later that night, I opened my laptop and wrote a letter. It wasn't for investors. It wasn't a white paper or a pitch. It was a family manifesto. 1 page. No numbers. No graphs. Just truth. About how success looks different. About how being underestimated can be a gift. About how silence can be strength, but connection is stronger. I called it, The Legacy We Didn't See Coming. I printed out 6 copies and slipped them into envelopes, each one signed your son, brother, uncle, and builder. Because finally they knew who I was. I thought I'd seen it all. The tears. The apologies. The dinners with less tension and more laughter. I thought the hardest parts were over. Until the letter arrived. Not from Rachel. Not from my parents. From a lawyer. A man named Daniel Reese, representing a party I hadn't heard from in over 8 years. My estranged cousin, Cameron Danner. We hadn't spoken since we were teenagers. He was always the slick one, the natural businessman, as my dad used to say. He'd gone into real estate after a short, spectacularly failed stint in insurance, bounced from city to city, and eventually disappeared from family gatherings altogether. Now he was back with a claim. According to the letter, Cameron believed he was entitled to a share of the Danner family trust, the one I'd created. He was threatening legal action. At first I laughed. Out loud. In the middle of my kitchen holding a glass of orange juice. You don't get to vanish for nearly a decade and then come sniffing around because you heard about some secret trust fund. But then I read the fine print. His angle? That since the trust used the Danner name and benefited multiple family members, he had a legal argument for inclusion, especially if the trust's funds were distributed without full disclosure or a documented family charter. In other words, my generosity might have left the door open. Rachel was furious. He didn't even call. Didn't show up to Zoe's birthday. Now he wants in. People have radar for money, I said bitterly. They smell it the second it hits warm air. Dad wanted to call his old friend from the county courthouse. Mom wanted to pretend it wasn't happening. I did what I always do, dug into the code. But this time not software. Strategy. Revenge. I reached out to Olivia. I want to make this go away, but not quietly. She raised an eyebrow. Explain. I want him exposed. I want the family to see what happens when someone tries to manipulate their way into a legacy they never helped build. Risky, she warned. But poetic. Exactly. The next step was simple. I invited Cameron to a family meeting. Rachel hated the idea. Why give him a platform? Because he's already talking to lawyers. This way we control the room. We hosted it at the new family house. Everyone was there. Brandon, Rachel, my parents, even Zoe, though she stayed upstairs watching cartoons. Cameron arrived late in a rental car that still had a Hertz sticker on the window. His suit was too shiny, his grin too wide. Cousins, he exclaimed, arms out. Wow, look at this place. Looks like the Danners finally made it. Dad didn't even stand to greet him. I offered him coffee. He declined. Let's just get to the point. Rachel sat beside me, stone-faced. Cameron pulled out a folder. I have a draft of a motion ready to file. I'll spare the legal jargon, but the gist is, this trust uses our family name. I'm family. Therefore, I should be entitled to a stake. He leaned back. Unless you want to settle this outside of court. I stood. Cameron, you're not entitled to anything. You weren't here. Not when Mom's mortgage was overdue. Not when Dad needed surgery. Not when Zoe's tuition bill came due. You weren't family, you were gone. Cameron laughed. That's emotional logic, Micah. Courts don't care about feelings. They care about documentation. I smiled. And then I handed him my folder. Inside, a notarized addendum to the Danner Family Trust. Created the previous week. Legally amending its purpose and naming all current beneficiaries as parties based on both familial relation and direct historical involvement. In other words, if you hadn't shown up before now, you didn't get squat. And here's the kicker, I said, flipping to the final page. This trust was funded through a private LLC registered under my name. All contributions are traceable to my company, not a public estate. Meaning, it's not family money. It's mine. Cameron's smirk vanished. This trust isn't a shared inheritance. It's a series of private gifts. No judge will rule in your favor. And if you try, I'll countersue for defamation and legal harassment. And I have the resources to bury you in filings until you forget your own middle name. The room was silent. Then Dad, of all people, leaned forward. You had a shot to be part of this family, Cam. You chose not to. Now live with it. Cameron stood, lips tight. You always thought you were smarter than everyone, he muttered. No, I said. Just more patient. He walked out without another word. After he left, Mom whispered, How long have you been preparing for that? Since the moment I saw the envelope, I said. Rachel beamed. Micah, you're like Batman. But for spreadsheets. I grinned. I prefer kryptonite. Even Dad laughed. But what none of them knew was that this twist was never about the lawsuit. It was about something deeper. It was about proving to myself that I didn't need to stay silent anymore. That I could protect what I built. That I could speak up and still be heard. That I wasn't the invisible one in the room anymore. I was the one drawing the blueprints. There was no celebration after Cameron left. No champagne, no speeches, not even a round of "we told you so." Just quiet. And that was enough. Because silence was no longer a prison for me. Now it was peace. Later that week, Dad asked me to go fishing. Something we hadn't done since I was a teenager. Back then, he used to fill the silence between bites with unsolicited life lessons and long-winded stories about real work. But this time, we just sat. Side by side on a small dock near Keystone Lake, lines in the water, cooler between us. You know, he said finally, I've been thinking about Cameron. And about you. I said nothing. I let him talk. I spent so many years looking for success in places I could understand. Jobs with titles, houses with fences, paychecks with deductions. That's the only language I knew. He exhaled, eyes scanning the ripples. But you built your own language. and I didn't bother to learn it. I mocked it. I mocked you. Pause. I'm sorry. I felt that one in my chest. That means more than you know, I said quietly. I don't want to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for being wrong. I just want to spend it being right about you now. I nodded. Then let's start here. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the same place I built my empire, one line of code at a time. But now it felt different, because I didn't need to prove myself anymore. I had already done that. Not with words, not even with money, but with legacy. That's what I realized I'd been building all along, not just wealth or revenge but something lasting. Something that would outlive the apologies. A month later, the family held a dinner, not a holiday, just a celebration. Zoe baked cupcakes with Bitcoin logos made of frosting. Brandon showed off his new work tablet, courtesy of a crypto leasing startup I'd helped him launch. He called me his technical co-founder. I didn't correct him. Rachel announced she was launching a podcast for women navigating financial independence. I offered to sponsor every episode. Mom and Dad, settled into their new home, looked 10 years younger. And Uncle John? He walked in wearing a t-shirt that said, "Ask me about my nephew's blockchain." God help me. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside again. "I found something while we were unpacking," he said, holding out a wrinkled envelope. "Thought you'd want it back." It was the first sketch of my blockchain diagram, from when I was 19. Scratched in pencil, water-stained, almost illegible. I stared at it for a long time. "You kept this?" "Didn't understand a word of it," he said. "But I figured, maybe one day I would." We sat on the porch, passing the sketch back and forth. "Micah," he said softly, "what do you want to do now?" I looked out at the sky. "I want to teach. Not in a classroom. But through action. I want to build tools that make it easier for the next kid like me to be heard, without needing $42 million first." He grinned. "Now that I understand." So I did. The Danner Family Trust expanded. Not just for our family anymore, but for underserved teens with ideas and no support, for self-taught coders sleeping on couches, for the next generation of visionaries stuck in rooms full of doubters. I called it the Quiet Builder Initiative. No press releases. No interviews. Just tools. Scholarships. Mentorships. Because I didn't need applause. I already had the one thing I thought I'd never earn. Their respect. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't humiliation or exposure. It's letting the people who once doubted you become the people who proudly carry your legacy. And realizing that you never needed their permission to succeed, only your own. Sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.